Good morning, everyone. It looks like we're live and on the air. The red light is on, as they say. And welcome to this, I think 7 weeks, J.C., 8 weeks, something like that, class, Pilgrims in this Wired World. I've had two different people ask me, should this be Weird World? And it would make sense if I told you who they were, Jason Magus and Jim Crandall. So, you know, guys who ask questions that aren't really questions. But you'll figure out, as I figure out what this class is about in real time. And at the end of today, I'll go over what to expect in the next several weeks. If you don't have a handout, there are some on a chair at the back of the room, and avail yourself. But as we begin, I invite you to join me in prayer. We are grateful, Lord, that you have not left us without a word, but that you have spoken. You've spoken over time and in different ways. We're most grateful for the final word, the ultimate word in your Son, Jesus Christ. We pray that the Spirit which he has given to the church and given to each one of us would guide and lead us to make us wise unto salvation. Help us to look to your word, to know how to live and what to do in a strange and challenging time. And we ask these things in the name of your Son. Amen. So this is a class that J.C. Derrick completely thought up on his own, came up with the idea, and asked me if I would just be a small part of it. J.C., who is a journalist by training and profession, will be teaching the next couple of weeks. That he will appreciate the phrase plausible deniability, which I learned from President Ford back when I was a younger man. So I'm trying to build my case for plausible deniability and also to make it sound interesting about what's going to come down. Well, welcome to the wired world, or the wired wilderness, shall we say. The hymn, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, what's the next line? Pilgrims in this barren land. We're going to finish the hour singing that. I always like to sing at the end of Sunday school. That hymn characterizes the Christian life as one of walking through the wilderness, and this is based on a very strong biblical motif. Where in the New Testament is the Christian life described as a wilderness? Anybody know? Anybody got any ideas? Anybody want to guess so I can embarrass you? Yes, Wendy. In the New Testament. Yeah, that's Genesis is yeah, that's the discussion's over for the day. The book of Hebrews addresses the Christian using many passages from Israel's wilderness experience. And so the Christian life is like that of the generation of Israelites who passed through the wilderness from slavery in Egypt to the promised land. 1 Corinthians 10, talking about the baptism into the sea, drinking from the rock and so forth as examples for us upon whom the end of the age has come. Stephen, in this magnificent sermon in Acts chapter 7, describes Abraham and the fathers as sojourners in the land, and then Hebrews 11 picks up on that, right? That all these died in faith, but they were looking for a better country, looking for a city which has what? Foundations, whose architect, designer, and builder is God. And Peter, in 1 Peter, begins his letter to the churches of the diaspora by addressing them by two important titles that Christians still bear. It is sojourners and aliens. In other words, the New Testament pictures us as still traveling through a wilderness or a barren land while we await a better city. And so what's different is the world we live in today compared to, say, first century Christians. So let me ask you, what's the difference? I don't even need to explain the question, do I? What's the difference when we're talking about living in a wired wilderness? What are some of the differences that you recognize in your life that you just didn't ever have to think about in the past? Yeah, we live in an information deluge. We're at a sea in anybody have an inbox an email inbox that's a little full? Anybody? You know, I went on a sabbatical a few years ago. I had this wonderful moment where I saw my inbox just gradually shrinking. And I didn't know what was going on. And by the time I figured out what was going on, it was empty. And what had happened, a book I was reading had fallen on the delete key. And so I sat there a moment and I said, now I could go into the deleted box and look through there and, no, I'll take the gift. I said, I'll take the gift. So seriously. What are some other, the information flood, the information deluge? Yes, Larry? The virtual world that seems real, in fact, seems more real to many people than there's a, what is his name? He sings a lot of parody country western songs. Brad Paisley. And he's got a song called Online, where he talks about who he is online versus, he says, I live in a 3-bedroom ranch and I'm 6'2" and so forth. He said, in reality, I live in my mom's basement and, and so forth. But it's one thing to represent in a way that we know is not accurate, but then it's not uncommon to represent in a way that people actually believe it's true, more true than who they really are. So that's another. And we're going to try not to just beat up on social media during this time. That's the easy target. And because it's easy, I want us to think more broadly. Yes, Sarah? Yeah. Marshall McLuhan spoke of this global village where the whole world one day, and he said this in the 60s, be wired to our brains. And it's true. And I see this in education. There's been definitely a shift from knowing something to knowing where to find something. Because if I can find it, then why do I need to know it? Are there some good things? You serve on the missions committee. Are there some good things about this? Yeah. Yeah, you can talk to people. You can Zoom. We Zoom with missionaries. And, the world feels smaller, and that's good. But the world feels smaller, and that's horrible. Right? It's a very much a mixed bag. What are some other... Yes, Kay?
I would just say advances in general, not technology.
Uh-huh.
But even like you said, let's not look at Genesis and let's look at, what they said in Hebrews. And my mind immediately went to how different life was back then to the way it is now.
In the good old days.
Well, it's supposed to be easier nowadays with all the advances.
Yes.
But I don't think it necessarily is.
Yeah, so...
Life was simpler when books were the norm and face-to-face conversation was the norm, and there wasn't a bar set for each individual that was so high you were constantly
So the expectations can have expanded about life and about others. And Vic and I have a friend, he's an computer engineering professor at University of Michigan. He makes nanobots that live on snails in Indonesia. I'm not going to explain why we need nanobots on snails, but now we can do surgeries and treatments without opening up, the skin of doing surgery. I talked to somebody recently. They had a baby girl, seminary student, a baby girl with a hole in her heart, and they went through a tiny hole in her back to fix twice to do open heart. Well, it wasn't even open heart, right? Surgery anymore. So some wonderful blessings, but also what is the anxiety? Is anxiety gone up or down? Up, okay. Recent books come out. It's in the resources of your handout. Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. A year after Instagram, attempted suicides among teenage girls more than tripled, I think. Correlation or causation? Haidt wants to argue that there's causation. But you get the idea. Technology brings great blessings, but on the other hand, it also brings disenchantment. And particularly when I use that term disenchantment, I mean disconnection from the physical world. In the women's devotional in January, I made some analogy to, we stand in awe of rockets going up in the night, but except for Tuesday, we rarely look at the sun in the sky, right? That it's tomorrow? Oh, good, because I probably would have gotten really scared tomorrow. Like, Vicky's returning to our home area. They have totality for the second time in 7 years. It's just not fair. But yeah, we don't look at stars. I mean, we look at monster trucks for our wonderment. And so we'll talk more about that. There are wonderful things like telecommuting. And then there are these horrible things like telecommuting. There is a connection to people who are way, way, way off. And then there's the downside of connection to people who are way, way, way off. A troll on your social media profile, somebody you've never known, never met, will never meet, can ruin your day more than somebody, say, living next door. We eat processed foods. When Vicki was a first grade teacher back in St. Louis, she would take her children out to her parents' farm, and a lot of kids, it was like their first recognition that food didn't come from Kroger's. She didn't take them to the processing plant for the meat, but speaking of which, Napoleon Dynamite did. When the farmer dispatched the cow in front of the school bus. But if you've never seen Napoleon Dynamite, I'm not sure whether I would tell you to watch it or not. But in fact, funny story, we watched as a family 3 or 4 times, always stopped at the credits, didn't realize there was a wedding after the credits, and completely missed. If you can't see it from there, during the wedding, the groom sings a song. Yes, I love technology, but not as much as you see, but still I love technology. This is Kip. He met LaFonda online. His, you know the story. If you know the story, if you don't, it's a wasted 15 seconds. And if you don't know about Napoleon Dynamite, you have been under a rock and don't have technology. So what part of what this class is about, and especially this opening time, is just an introduction to the notion of media ecology. Now, how many of you have heard the term before? Probably a lot of you heard media ecology. It's a metaphor. You know, we know about ecology in the physical world, right? Things that the air and the water and the wildlife and all these things aren't just isolated, separated things, but the whole system is very integrated. And so, you know, a certain bug disappears and the apex predator starts to die off, or the ice melts and the polar bear, you know, or as famously, I think the line was quoted in Jurassic Park, a butterfly flaps its wings, where? In Tokyo, and it snows over the Andes Mountains. Is that right? Did I finish it right? Huh? Something like that. Now, I have been in cities, in the developing world particular, where you can see the air. You get up and you look out the window and you can see the air, and that's not a good thing. When you can see the air, you know it's not good. Or if your water doesn't look clear, you know it's not good. But we also know that a lot of the things that affect us are things we don't see. In fact, there are probably more things that affect us in the physical ecology, ecosystem. There are more things that affect us that we don't see than that we do see. Whether it's antibiotics in the water system or plastics in the ocean, trying to not raise your anxiety level, but you know, we're very aware of these things. Well, going back to, we'll go back to the 60s in just a moment. There were advocates of communication and technology who said, we need to look at communication and technology as something like an ecosystem. I use the phrase seeing the water here. The late David Foster Wallace, one of the great late 20th century American novelists, he gave an address at Kenyon College. Wallace was not a professing Christian, although he didn't seem far from the kingdom at times. But in his address to the Kenyon College students, he told a little parable of two young fish swimming along, and an old fish comes swimming by, and the old fish says, "How's the water, boys?" And the two young fish, I won't quote exactly, but they kind of look at one another as the old fish swims away, and they say, "What the heck's water?" Because as young fish, they hadn't learned that there's this thing called water around them that is pretty important as far as how it affects their lives. And so, you know, as Christians, you know, one of the, you know, relevant things that Paul says is, you know, we're to redeem the time, for the days are evil. Or when Paul's writing to Timothy in 1 Timothy 3, he says, you know, he mentions the scriptures which are able to make you wise to salvation. That God's word is a lamp to our feet, a light to our path, and that God doesn't leave us alone in the wilderness or the place where we live. He gives us His word. He has spoken to us in His Son, and then also the scriptures which witness to how He has spoken to us in His Son. So part of what we're after is becoming aware. And so the word media, by the way, does not refer to just news or entertainment. A medium is any extension of human activity. That's the standard definition. So a pencil is a medium, or a rock is a medium, depending on what you want to do with it. But a shovel. So technology is the development and the use of media to do human things. And so we're not just going to think narrowly about social media. We're not just going to think narrowly about news and entertainment, although J.C. will have some very important things to say about that the next 2 weeks. McLuhan McLuhan was famous for having said, the medium is the message. And what he meant by that is the container that something is in actually changes the thing. Sometimes you hear, and I've worked with many churches over a long time now, sometimes you hear, I'm not changing the message, I'm just changing the medium. And that's a really naive, almost blind, I would say, statement. Paul talks about the importance of the medium in 1 Corinthians 1. He says the Greeks, they wanted sophistry. The Greeks wanted philosophy. And the Jews, they wanted signs. And in both cases, the Greeks regarded philosophical discourse, sophistry, as sort of the form of divine revelation. And for the Jews, their history, Moses and the great signs of Exodus and the wilderness and so forth, and even Jesus performed signs in order to demonstrate who he was. For the Jews and their history, miraculous signs were the form of divine revelation. And Paul said, I did not give them either. But rather, he said, I came preaching the foolishness of the cross. And Paul there is a media ecologist. He's recognizing that the shape of something, the packaging, changes things. Paul argued in the synagogue. He debated in the forums. Paul did signs and wonders at times, but he's also the apostle who said in chapter 9, I became as all things to all men so that I might save some. He said that. But when it comes down to it, he recognized that the shape of something changes the thing, and we need to understand how it changes the thing.
Would an example be having a service online?
Would an example be having a service online? Exactly, Ken. If used to you could say, if I can't see you, you're not my friend. But then Skype and Zoom and so forth came along. But now we have to say, if I can't smell you, you're not my friend. Because, and it's one of the big things we're going to get into, is embodiment is how we were created. And not just individual embodiment, but relational embodiment. We were created to be in relational, embodied connections to other people. So an online service or an online, now it's a wonderful technology. We have senior citizens. We have young Jim Crandall's mother who watches from Westminster Towers. How are you? Good to see you if you're here with us this morning. We have, when you're sick or traveling, you can kind of see what you missed with your church family. But as some of you probably know, some churches have struggled mightily to get their people back in the building. I was asked not too long ago by an elder in a church, there's a family that moved away 3 years ago. They've still been attending online, still been giving to the church, and they wanted their child baptized. They live several hours away. And of course the answer is no, because baptism is baptism into the body of Christ. So that's a perfect example. On the one hand, it can be a great gift for outreach, but it's not a substitute for embodied life together. So McLuhan also said the medium is the massage. If you watch the Geico commercial, you know what I'm talking about. How do they sell you insurance? By making fun of insurance. Because they know if they try to be sincere to sell you insurance, you're going to be like, oh, that's an insurance commercial. I'm tuning it off, turning it out. And so they changed the medium from a straight up sell to a parody in order to massage you. When my children were young, we fell into this thing. When we were on long trips, we'd exegete billboards as we drove. I would say, Samuel, what does that billboard say? And he said, if you buy that car, you'll get that girl. Which kind of worked out a little bit. But not the Miata, I don't think, that kind of way. But so the medium is the massage. And it really, McLuhan, if we took more time, we could I think I have a pen somewhere. Well, I'll just say it. McLuhan gave us a tool. It's called McLuhan's tetrad because there are 4 parts of it. Every new technology potentially enhances life in some way, but in other ways, at the same time, it reverses some things. New technologies retrieve something from the past, but they also obsolesce other things. For example, email. It enhanced speed, quantity, but it's a reversal because of the ease of email. We're not able to be, it's not meaningful like the war letters I have that my mom and dad wrote between the U.S. and Europe during the 1940s. There's reversal with email. Anybody remember when you were at college, wait until Sunday night when the rates went down to call home? Okay. Email brought us back to correspondence, written correspondence in some respects, but it also obsolesced the post office, almost. So, you can look, this is a good way to look at how do technologies help us by enhancement and retrieval, but at the same time, how do they reverse and obsolesce things? And so being wise people means being able to perform that kind of analysis. I mean, it sounds kind of sophisticated, so I think we often will do it at the common sense level without having to be, academically minded. But the important thing is just being aware, right? Being aware, because if you're not aware, then you can't look for something. So what are the environmental hazards of this wired world that we live in? Well, the big one is alienation. Because alienation is like the sweeping generalization that you can use to describe the fall and the consequences of the fall. What are some ways that the fall, not only the particular acts of Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, but then kind of life since then? What are some aspects of life where you see alienation as a result of the fallen world? Alienation. Not alien nation, Scott, but alienation. Yes, Larry.
Separation from each other, pulling apart.
Yeah. I mean, the immediate thing was Adam and Eve kind of doing what the plaintiff's lawyers, or what the defendant's lawyers do, which cross point. Is that right, Brandon? Yeah. Okay. All right. Enmity, because in Genesis 3:15, when it says there will be enmity between your seed and her seed, God is speaking to Satan there. It's not just in the spiritual realm, but it's describing 2 races of humanity. The seed of the woman, that is those who fear the Lord and who call upon His name and who walk by faith, and then the rest of the world, the city of man, which has this natural hostility toward the city of God. And so alienation between people, that's a big one. Others? Where else do you see alienation? Yes?
On a broad sense, like people groups, like you can't talk. You're talking about
Yeah. So between people groups. So the Tower of Babel was intended to unite humanity for the purpose of self-glorification, building a tower to heaven, and its result was this fragmentation. In God's common grace, He restrains humanity's ability to accomplish all that it could accomplish in the face of God. Well, let's one way of thinking about it is just in general. There's this division of things, including disembodiment. What would happen? Adam would still till the ground, but it would yield thorns and thistles, and then what? return to what? The dust. From dust you were taken, you'll return to the dust. So the separation of the body and the soul is a consequence of the fall. Death is not a graduation ceremony for a Christian. There's this wonderful thing about being in the presence of the Lord spiritually. But there's also this separation from the body until the resurrection. Just ask a widow or a widower if death is a graduation. This is why it's called the intermediate state, because it's not permanent. Separation of body from soul. We experience that daily. I asked Bud Leonard before Sunday school, I said, how big of a coin does it need to be for you to bend over to pick it up anymore? He said, well, I can pick up a coffee bean. I said, well, I won't pick up anything less than a quarter. And I expect their day will come where only paper money will I bend over for. But when we feel the decay of our bodies over life through sickness, it's a sign of the fall. But it's more than that. There's a term somebody's used called discarnation. You know, incarnation is to be in the flesh. Discarnation is this notion that I am not my body, which is substantially behind, the emerging ideology of sexual attraction and gender orientation, that my biological body is secondary to my gender or my sexual attraction. That's part of it. Who we physically are doesn't define us. Well, it does, but it doesn't, right? We're fallen in our bodies, but we're still in our bodies. And so no matter who I try to be online or in a virtual community, or who I try to be at work and hide who I am in secret, that's a symptom of disembodiment. Another symptom of the fall is disenchantment. I read an interesting book recently by Joseph Minich. There are two, actually. One is called Enduring Divine Absence. The follow-along is called Bulwarks of Unbelief. And he's asking the question, why in previous times when people experienced divine absence did they still default toward theism, versus now when people experience divine absence, that is the sense that God is not there, they increasingly default to atheism. And one of his primary explanations is that technology has enabled us to have an arm's length relationship with the world. You know, if you're driving a backhoe and you hit something hard or you come up against a big root, tell me about this, Connor. Preach it, right? Connor Foster's familiar with the never mind. We won't go into that. But you can feel it. It's a machine. It's a medium, right? It's a powerful work multiplier. But that's different than sitting at a computer-operated lathe with what kind of controls are they called? Joysticks, doing something. You might hear, your machines might tell you. Think about this. Our smartphones now have what are called haptics. What are haptics? Your phone does things. Your wrist buzzes. And then you get phantom. Anybody reach in their pocket yet this morning to think that their phone was vibrating and it wasn't? But one big area of haptics is to simulate processes that have been lost. I see an Apple pen out there in the market. It's not by Apple, but it's by somebody else that's supposed to simulate the feel of writing with a pen on paper. Because an Apple pen has eliminated friction, right? There is no friction that we can even detect remotely. My daughter and I are we love fountain pens. We're big into fountain pens. I've talked to Derrick about good pens and good paper. But part of the appeal of that is to feel what we're engaging with. But in increasing ways, we're not engaging physically with the material world. And so what Minich in his 2 books has argued that what's changed is people see the created order as material to be manipulated, not a world of wonderment that reveals the mysterious and transcendent creator. You look at how the Bible talks about creation, Psalm 8, Psalm 19, Psalm 104. It's this, what's the hymn? All creation sings thy glory, the David Clowney hymn. But in the modern world, even somebody who in their mind and their heart believes in God might see the world as a place to be just manipulated, raw material for doing life. And so there's this loss of wonderment. That's a result of this alienation amplified by technologies. Dehumanization. This basic question, what are people for? What are people? You see this, Dr. Reed teaches Genesis through Joshua, the early chapters of Genesis. You see the earliest human societies, right, Dr. Reed, where beastliness comes out. Pastor Borger preached through Daniel. What happened to Nebuchadnezzar when he thought of himself as godlike? Well, he became like a cow. There's a whole motif throughout the Bible where in our depraved states we act more like animals than images of God. Paul says, uses the expression, if you bite and devour one another. And sometimes the back seat full of kids on a long trip, you want to get the super squirter out. My dad used to just, do this, without even looking. But, huh? And somebody, I heard on the NPR show Car Talk one time, I heard this guy, he had the perfect solution. He had a Volvo that had collapsible headrests in the back. And if he needed to, he could use the headrest for dope slapping his sons. But it's when people... And that's what Paul says in Romans 1, right? They gave over their natural desires for unnatural desires. They started acting like animals. And so we see this all the time, don't we? That how we treat other people, like if you put yourself in a 5,000-pound machine, 10 feet from the next person reduces their humanity, right? If you're standing 10 feet from somebody on a sidewalk, you're very aware of their presence. But on a street, with traffic issues and so forth, they are less human.
I'm always surprised when I see these videos of someone being assaulted, and I'm thinking, why is there a video of this? Why aren't you helping?
Ken says that when you see videos of people assaulting others, why is the person videoing it? Well, it could be somebody who doesn't feel physically able to interact, but they want to document it. But it's not uncommon now with school fights for the smartphones to come out, and it even start before the event, and it's. But let's want to make sure we cover as much as we can here. There's this disenchantment, there's dehumanization, there's redefinition of who people are, and there's this big thing what I'll call sim gospels. Anybody ever play Sim City? That's a certain age thing, right? It's this computer game where you did what, Val? What does Sim City do? You do everything, right? Yeah, it's a simulated city. Can you build a city? And can you, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but a sim gospel is a simulated gospel. Now, we could say they're false gospels. Every other gospel except the biblical gospel is true. But think particular about advertising. All your hopes and dreams will be fulfilled. Of course, advertising is made to make you unhappy because happy people don't open their wallets. Happy people don't click. So marketing and advertising is designed to make you unhappy. But have you ever had that feeling walking out of Best Buy? Kids, Best Buy was a store that... but have you ever had that experience, you know, of buying some new technology, and then you have this... It's like you ate too much at Golden Corral. It's just... It's like it didn't make you feel the way that you thought it would. Or it wasn't worth the money you spent. So there are a lot of gospels, and smartphones are desire machines. They're desire machines, and is the internet. And so these are all symptoms of the fall in this wired world. What we're supposed to do is to seek a better city. I've mentioned these passages already. Stephen in his speech, in his sermon, describes Abraham this way. 1 Peter describes the church on earth after the resurrection and ascension of Christ as aliens and strangers. I think Dr. Cole gave me permission. I hope to teach a class on 1 Peter in the fall. I don't think there's any book of the Bible that is a better charter for Christian living today than 1 Peter. And so why does Peter address people that way? Well, they're living scattered throughout Anatolia, that part of Asia Minor, Christians living in all these cities, but they're all citizens of another country. I don't know what the farthest you've been from home is. I've been to Central Asia, 2 12-hour flights. You can't even read the Pepsi signs, although you recognize the logos, which is something called simulacra commodification. We're not going to talk about that, but I was in Argentina one time, and my guest was driving me around, and he says, "There's the American Embassy. It's a golden arches." But I got on that plane to leave Central Asia. Everyone around me speaking Russian. Can't read the safety card. Can't read anything. And I see a blue passport. I see another blue passport. And I realized I was just hungry, searching for blue passports. U.S. passports. My countrymen. But, you know, if you've had that feeling of living as an expat somewhere, you perhaps have had that experience. And so Peter's addressing believers this way. And probably in the last week, I'll wrap up. When I wrap up, I'll say more about that. But, Hebrews 11 describes those who died in faith while they were still looking for a better country. It wasn't the country they came from. Abraham wasn't looking to go back to Ur of the Chaldees. In fact, it was the land he was living in that was promised to him, but it wasn't his yet. God had not granted it to him yet. And so this is very much where we live as Christians. We live in a place where God will reign one day. The glory of the Lord will fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. And every knee will bow to Jesus Christ as Lord. But we're not there yet. But this is the place where it's all going to happen. And so how do we live in a place that God has already staked a claim to, already promised to us, but is not yet, as Hebrews 2 says, we don't see all things subjected to him as we one day will, that we still pray, your kingdom come where? I know this is an easy one. Your kingdom come on earth as it is heaven. And remember, and listen for it at the opening of the service today when Justin talks about our vision as a church to make visible as the body of Christ the kingdom that already exists in the heavenly realms. Our citizenship is in heaven, Philippians 3 says. So we're to seek a better city. How are we to do that? First of all, by acknowledging the supremacy of Christ. Colossians 1, 15 through 23 says Jesus is first in two ways. How is he first in two ways, Dr. Cole? He's the firstborn of creation and recreation. He's firstborn from the dead. And Paul is saying those two things intentionally, right? Because Colossians 1 goes on to say, as the firstborn of creation and the firstborn from the dead, he is reconciling all things. It's in him that everything holds together and everything will one day be one again. All that dualism, the disembodiment, the dehumanization, all that is reconciled in the Creator Son becoming the Redeemer and resurrected Son. So, Lordship of Christ. You're not going to live as a pilgrim in this wired world well and faithfully unless you settle that matter by saying Christ is Lord. It's a matter of lordship. And we know that day in, day out, we do better or worse to be faithful to the Lordship of Christ. It's not a matter of have been there, done that. We keep being there and doing that every day, right? But that's where it begins. Secondly, realizing we're there in a certain sense. Hebrews 11 says, all these died in faith without receiving the promises. And then in chapter 12, verse 22, it says, we have come to Mount Zion and to the Jerusalem which is above, to the church of the firstborn, to the myriad of angels, all the things that one day will be visible on this earth at the consummation. We're already there in Christ. Because in between chapter 11 and chapter 12 is Christ who finished the race, who despised the shame, and entered in. So you have these passages like Colossians 3. If you've died with Christ, if you've died with Christ, and you've been raised with Christ, and now you're seated with Christ at the right hand of God in the heavenly places. Union with Christ takes us to heaven, to the right hand of God today. So we live in this already. We've arrived. And so it's not a matter of hope. We're not immigrants hoping to get our citizenship. We're not on tenterhooks waiting to receive the country, the city, the body, the temple, all the things that the Bible calls us. But they're ours now because of Christ's resurrection and ascension, his exaltation into the heavens. But in the meantime, we wait. We wait. We run so as to, we beat our bodies. We run so as to win the race and not be disqualified. We aspire to the upward call, the prize of the upward call, which is in Christ. And Paul says in Philippians 3 that to share in his resurrection power, the prerequisite is to share in his suffering. And so as I alluded to in the Good Friday sermon, but here again, the Christian life is a cruciform life. That the cross is more than a piece of jewelry or a symbol of the Christian faith, but the cross is the path, the pattern of Christian living. We like crown, but we don't like cross. But it's through cross that life comes, Jesus told us. We are to be of a different mind, Romans 12 tells us. Do not be what? Conform to what? This world, but be transformed by. And by the word, the New Testament word for mind is roughly equivalent to the Old Testament word for heart. Heart is not just the emotions, mind is just not the cognition, but it is the core of one's existence, orientation, outlook on life, the essence of our being. So being transformed by the renewing of our minds isn't just to gain certain knowledge, it certainly includes that, but it's like Colossians 3 once again, set your mind, orient yourself, habituate yourself toward, set your mind on the things which are above. Being prepared. Jesus made not as many promises as people think sometimes. He didn't write as many checks or sign as many checks as a lot of people would like to think. But one check he did sign was, in this world you will have trouble or tribulation. We've been promised that we will experience trial. So 1 Peter in chapter 1 verse 13 says, gird yourselves. Now, well, that's a good word because it sounds like girder, but it's pull up your pants, tighten your belt, buckle your chin strap, get ready, be prepared. Because later in chapter 4 he says, do not be surprised at what? The fiery ordeal which comes upon you. Don't be surprised. I mean, the least surprised people in the world should be Christians. I mean, we do get surprised, like we pick up, well, there's this thing called a newspaper. But when we look at the news, when we listen to the news, I'm so glad J.C. is going to pilot us with some good habits and orientations because the term I like to use, the anger industrial complex that really wants us to be upset most of the time. But we should never be surprised, right? But particularly we shouldn't be surprised and outraged at when there's enmity from the world toward the believer, because it's a sign of celebration of our union with Christ. Rejoice that we share in his name and in his suffering. Another thing we can do is recovering wonder. I have a photo that I use in class. It shows a bunch of people looking at a parade, and they've all got their phones out, and there's one little old lady who's just got her hands on the rail watching the parade. It's a beautiful picture of somebody who's not distracted, but who is in the moment. There's a wonderful Wendell Berry poem called Vacation, where it describes how the father video recorded the whole vacation so that later he could be in it. But the problem was he would never be in it. You see, by observing, by recording, we become absent. This is why, I don't know if I'm the start of a movement, but several years ago when Wendy's sister got married and I did the wedding, oh no, it was Rick's sister, I'm sorry. I asked a question and we ended up putting in the announcements something about the bride and groom would like you to be fully present and put away your phones. Anybody ever sat behind someone with an iPad at a graduation, whether recording? I mean, I saw that at Yale, This is, admission standards must have dropped because these people gave birth to these kids that went to Yale. Like iPads recording, you're trying to look around. But that's all a reflection of an absence of wonderment. Instead, when you go exercising, consider not one. It's hard not. I don't want to pick on anybody, but it's fathers and mothers both. But have you seen somebody pushing a stroller, looking at their phone as they push the stroller? There's a image of God sitting in that little vehicle, waiting to be talked to, spoken to, sung to, listened to. And playgrounds. But they might get hurt. No, the playgrounds have been child-proofed, right? That's one of Jonathan Haidt's earlier books. Is like, our children aren't resilient because we've put them in big giant bubbles so they won't get hurt. But one of I didn't put it in the handout today, but one of the things that happens, it's in Maggie Jackson's book, Distracted. Extended screen time actually degrades the neuroplasticity of the brain so that the hemispheres don't communicate as well together, and it breaks down our ability to concentrate. And There was an NPR story a number of years ago about 6 neuroscientists who went on a rafting trip together to debate this question. And they were off the grid for like 10 days. And by the time they came off the river, they were unanimous about the neuroplasticity question. But one of the things that resets the brain's neuroplasticity is increased focal distance and getting outside. Duh. And so just increasing our focal distance, looking at things in the distance, looking around us, opening our ears instead of the Fahrenheit 451 seashell. No, I'm not going to. Maybe the last week we'll talk about it. And faithful witness, that we are to do our works in such a way that God brings glory. We're to live as Christians in such a way that people recognize we are different, that we belong to another, that we are citizens of a better country. I'm going to fast forward to the last couple of things. On the back of your handout is a list of a number of resources that I have found very helpful. Scott Hunt is going to come in a few weeks and talk about the book by Samuel James called Digital Liturgies. And so that will actually get at things like phone and personal technology habits. So I leave that. Or if you're interested in some of these titles but don't want to get or read the book, just go onto YouTube. Go onto YouTube. Technology's not bad. I mean, go onto YouTube and search for interviews with the authors, and they have some really good book capsules. And then the last thing, just to say where we're going. By the way, something you need to know about the newspaper, the print journalism business, is the journalists write the story, but they don't get to write the titles. True? True? That's true, right? So these are my titles for J.C.'s lessons. So he's got plausible deniability. So the next 2 weeks is going to put the good news and the news. That is how, as Christians, we can be wiser, more faithful to the Lord in our news habits. And then a Bible fork for news habits. Now, he wasn't familiar. Shakespeare in one of his works says, if you sup with the devil, bring a long spoon. I think Os Guinness maybe wrote a book on that or something. But in other words, we live in this world. We're not going anywhere, hopefully soon. We're not rejecting human accomplishment as very beneficial and a blessing from God, but we need to be wary and aware of how these things not only serve us, but how we serve them. The old maxim, if it's free, you're the what? The product. If something's free, it means whoever is providing you this free service is taking something from you, and you need to know what it is. Typically, it's information. And then Scott Hunt on Samuel James's book, Digital Liturgies. I think this will be very practical. Randy Bronson has had a particular interest for a number of years in Christian themes in movies and how some examples might help us to be more appreciative and as well as discerning movie and screen watchers. Dr. Cole, my colleague Jack Cole, will talk about reading as resistance. I can't wait because inevitably when one of us asks the other one about a book or something, probably about 2/3 of the time we both read it and loved it. And then the other third of the time we write it down and it becomes, it goes onto our list. And the Coles have a reading family, and in fact, your oldest is a reading monster, right? And then I don't know if anybody knows the band Chicago. You recognize the title for the last lesson. Nobody knows Chicago. Yeah, okay. But it's just going to come back and do a kind of a wraparound for everything. But I'd like us to finish, as I said, by singing and confessing that we are pilgrims, aliens, and strangers who belong to a better country. I'm not going to have you stand because that'll block your view. I remember that from before. I'm going to find us a pitch. I hope it's not too low. How many know Guide Me, O Thou Drinker? Guide me, O Thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but Thou art mighty. Hold me with your powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Feed me till I want no more. Open now the crystal fountain, whence the healing streams doth flow. Let the fire and cloudy pillar lead me all my journey through. Strong deliverer, be thou still my strength and shield. Be thou still my strength and shield. When I tread the verge of Jordan, bid my anxious fears subside. Death of death and hell's destruction, land me safe on Canaan's side. Songs of praises, I will ever give to thee. I will ever give to thee. And as you have issues or questions or things you'd like to throw in over the course of this class, feel free to email me or J.C. You're dismissed.